Hello Internet, welcome to Making Money. My name's Eric and this is your Daily Dollar, our financial segment where I give you one lesson every day to help you reach your financial goals. So we've been talking about investments lately, and the other day we did a video on 12 different types of investments that you as an investor can get in on and start making money. Now in these videos, we're breaking down those 12 a little bit more to give you a better idea of what they actually are, how you can make money on them, why you would want to make money on them. So we've gone over annuities and bonds and real estate. Today, we're talking about commodities. So in the 12 types of investments video, we talked briefly that commodities are basically just economic goods, resources. Think corn and crude oil. These items, these things that exist in the world that are bought and sold all around the world year round. Everybody's using them. We can make money off those. Now, this doesn't tend to be as common of an investment for most retail investors. If you go and talk stocks and bonds with someone, chances are commodities probably won't come up. Now, that being said, they are still a viable investment, and we'll get into why some investors get into investing in commodities. But to start off with, futures contracts, they are one way for you to invest in commodities. And how future contracts work are you're basically trying to predict the price of the commodity in the future. So let's say you have a futures contract that lets you buy, corn at X date in the future, and by time that date rolls around, if your contract says that you can buy it for less than it's currently selling for, then you're going to make money on that investment. Now, likewise, because we've talked about futures contracts before a little bit, if things, if it's now cheaper, you've lost money in that contract. So it can go both ways, and because of that, futures contracts tend to be a little bit more risky. Now, as we said with a lot of investments, that risk also means potentially higher rewards because price could go in the opposite direction or it could go in your favor. We talk about commodities, we tend to think kind of mundane things. Wheat and corn aren't really, exciting things to bring up, but they are rather complex. Futures contracts themselves are very involved and there are risks associated with them, and so you should really understand what you're doing before you get into futures contracts. But even commodities themselves, the price of commodities is impacted by so many external factors. Global supply chains, we're going through a pandemic, there's now a war going on. There's so much that impacts the price of these goods that, you never quite know what's going to be the next thing that causes big changes in the market. Because of that, you should apply a little bit more care when thinking about getting into commodities or into futures contracts. So, commodities. What types of commodities can you get into? We're going to talk about 4 main types of commodities today. The first one is metals. We talked the other day that precious metals I kind of threw under collectibles. For the sake of today's discussion, if a precious metal has an intrinsic value, meaning that we can quantify the value using external measures, then yes, technically it is a commodity. It can be considered a collectible as well, and we'll get to that in our next video. But for today, precious metals, gold, silver, and industrial metals, copper, iron, these type of things can be traded as commodities. Agricultural, we have wheat, corn, soybeans. There's livestock, pork bellies, feeder cattle. There's energy, crude oil, petroleum products, natural gas. So those 4 types, you got your precious metal or your metals, your agriculture, you've got your livestock, and your energy. So where can you buy these things? Well, you can get into commodities through stocks and ETFs. There are some stocks and ETFs that track commodities. And that, as an investor, especially a retail investor, is probably the easiest way for people to get into these type of investments. Now, again, we will bring back up futures contracts. That tends to be where most commodity investment happens. But when we talk futures contracts, where the heck do you go to trade futures contracts? It's not like you can go to the store, and just be like, hey, I'm gonna trade you a futures contract. I mean, technically you could, if they wanted to trade with you, but you would go to certain exchanges that allow you to trade these contracts. And what kind of exchanges exist? Well, here's a few. We've got the NYMEX, or the New York Mercantile Exchange. We have the Kansas City Board of Trade, the KCBT, Chicago Mercantile Trade, CME, Chicago Board of Trade, CBOT, Chicago Board of Options Exchange, CBOE, and the Minneapolis Grain Exchange, MGEX, as some examples. A lot of them exist in Chicago, apparently, which I was surprised by, but all of these different types of exchanges deal with commodities and futures contracts. So if you're interested in looking into it more, feel free to look at those. Again, though, be careful, because when we talk about future contracts, there is, again, it may seem mundane, but you should thoroughly understand them first. The risk of price movements are very present, and you can really get bit. So buyer beware, but that is where you would go if you would like to start trading in futures. Now, why would someone want to buy commodities, besides the fact that it is so exciting to buy corn? And besides the fact that, things like energy, crude oil and stuff like that, that does go up in price. We know that. But in general, the reason why investors would buy commodities as a hedge against inflation. I lost my voice there for a quick sec. And it is surprisingly effective. Again, you don't see retail investors trading in commodities all that much, but you do see larger companies and firms will trade futures contracts and commodities as a general hedge. So something to consider when you are looking at your investments. I'm interested, have you ever thought about getting into commodities before? Have you ever worked with future contracts? If you have, let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys are enjoying these videos. I'm enjoying making them. If you are, feel free to subscribe, always appreciate it. You can hit me up on Twitter, link in the description, and I will see you guys tomorrow for another lesson. All right, guys, see ya.